All right, so today we're diving into some opinions about, well, the Beatles.
Okay.
And and not everyone was a fan, surprisingly.
Right.
We found some interesting articles uh, about musicians, and some of these musicians are really big names who weren't exactly fans of the band.
Yeah, it's interesting how even with, figures that are so iconic, like the Beatles, you're still going to get a range of
You
opinions.
really are.
It kind of reminds you that music is subjective, art in general, it's subjective.
Definitely subjective.
Yeah.
Like we all bring our own baggage to it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so this one article I was looking at, it was talking about musicians from different generations, all these musicians who just weren't fans.
Wow.
And this isn't some obscure band either. We're talking Julian Casablancas,
Okay.
the frontman for The Strokes,
Right?
big name.
Yeah.
And he actually said that he thought that not being a Beatles fan was an advantage for his own music.
Really? That's an interesting thought. I mean, when you think about it, do you think that by defining himself against something so monumental, did that give him some kind of creative liberation?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, because think about it. It's not like back in the day when all you had was the radio, right?
Sure, true.
You were kind of stuck with whatever they were playing.
Right.
Now you have the entire internet, like the world of music
Everything at your fingertips, yeah.
at your fingertips.
Yeah.
So you're exposed to way more stuff.
Exactly. And that's something that Casablancas actually talked about, how the internet really changed the musical landscape for him because you have that wider range of influence now compared to back in the day when the Beatles were big and it was all radio.
The radio, yeah.
So it was a different time.
It really was. And, speaking of different times, Lou Reed,
Oh, boy.
the legend from the Velvet Underground,
Okay.
he straight up called the Beatles rubbish.
Wow.
Yeah,
He did not hold back.
he did not hold back. And he was very adamant that no other band at the time could hold a candle to the Velvet Underground.
Oh, yeah, that sounds about right. That's Lou Reed for you. Never one to mince words. But I'm curious, I mean, beyond just like the shock value of the statement, his comment really does make you think about the different schools of thought on music back then.
It does?
You had the Beatles with that very polished pop sound, very carefully crafted to appeal to as many people as possible.
It's true, yeah.
And then you have the Velvet Underground. They were raw, experimental, kind of dove into the underbelly of life, not exactly radio friendly.
Definitely not.
Their music was a rebellion
Yeah.
against the mainstream and maybe even against what the Beatles represented at the time.
Like these two completely different worlds colliding.
Exactly.
And that kind of leads us to another really interesting take on the Beatles.
Huh.
This one's from Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails.
Okay, yeah.
And he's been pretty vocal about disliking Beatlemania, as a musician himself. He always...
Yeah, as a young musician trying to find his own voice.
Exactly, yeah.
Trying to make it.
And he even said, and I quote, F the Beatles once.
It's a pretty strong statement. I mean,
It is.
wow.
But here's the kicker. Later on, he called the Beatles geniuses.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. So what do we make of that?
I don't know. It's quite a change.
It is a bit of a change.
From one end of the spectrum to the other.
It really makes you think about how our perspectives on things can change, right?
It really does.
As we evolve.
Yeah, like what does selling out even mean anymore?
Right.
It's also fluid now.
Exactly. Yeah. And, it wasn't all, resistance and anger when it came to the Beatles. Even Bob Dylan.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't realize he was a fan.
He had a soft spot for them.
Did he ever say which song he liked?
He did.
Which one?
Take a guess?
Oh, gosh. Yesterday.
It was I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Oh.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
A lot of people don't, but he actually called the chord progression outrageous.
Wow. That's pretty wild.
It's
crazy to think such a seemingly simple song would have that kind of impact.
I know. It really makes you think about those unexpected influences, doesn't it?
It really does.
You would never think that a song considered just pure pop would spark something in a songwriter known for such depth and, complexity.
It's true. And it just shows you how music can really transcend genres and expectations,
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes the most straightforward songs, they're the ones that wind up being the most revolutionary.
That's true.
I Want to Hold Your Hand had this really undeniable energy that captured a generation. And its influence, you can hear it even today in so many genres that came after.
Absolutely. And speaking of capturing a generation, I got to bring up Ringo Starr.
Okay.
Because he actually compared Taylor Swift's popularity
Oh, wow.
to Beatlemania.
Really?
That's a pretty bold statement coming from, I mean, a Beatle himself.
That is a bold statement.
Right.
Yeah, coming from somebody who experienced Beatlemania like firsthand. I mean, he was there.
He was there.
It makes you wonder, is he talking about just the scale of the fame or,
Yeah.
the way both the Beatles and Taylor Swift, they just seem to tap into the spirit of the time.
Yeah.
Like they really became those cultural touchstones
They did.
for their generation.
It makes you wonder if, 50, 60 years down the line, are people going to be looking at Taylor Swift the same way that we look at the Beatles now?
It's a good question.
Right.
I mean, it's really hard to predict what the future holds for music and legacy.
You're right. Yeah.
But you can't deny her impact.
No.
I mean, she's broken records, tons of records, and redefined what it means to be a pop star in the digital age.
The digital age.
Which is very different, yeah.
And her fan base is incredible.
She's cultivated this incredibly devoted fan base, and it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in the world.
It's wild, right? Like Beatlemania, but online.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the tools have changed, but that core connection, that's what matters.
It really makes you think, like, will people be analyzing Taylor Swift lyrics 50 years from now the way they do with the Beatles?
That's the beauty of it all, isn't it? Music sparks these conversations that go way beyond the songs themselves.
That's true. Yeah.
We start thinking about influence, about what lasts, about why certain sounds just stick with us.
We've been looking at the Beatles through the lens of how other musicians saw them. And it's amazing how, even after all these years, they still get people fired up.
It's their impact, The Beatles weren't just a band, they were a whole phenomenon.
Right.
They challenge everything, musically, socially, so of course you get both huge love and some pushback.
It's like their music became a test, almost, of whether you were open to change.
Exactly. They were a symbol of how much the world was changing. So people's reactions to them, it said something about how they felt about all that change, too.
So it's way more than just the music.
Way more, yeah.
We've heard from people who loved them, hated them, and even a Beatle comparing them to, like, a modern-day icon.
It's been quite the deep dive.
It has. What really stood out to you from all this?
For me, it just shows how personal taste in art really is.
Yeah.
There's no right answer when it comes to music.
Right.
It's about understanding the context, what the artist wanted to do, and how all of that mixes with our own lives.
It's like everyone brings their own baggage to listening to music.
Exactly. The Beatles remind us that even art everyone loves is still open to different views, and sometimes those different views are the most interesting ones.
Well said. So as you go about your day, think about this. How do you see the Beatles' place in music history? And what artists or cultural things make you feel strongly, whether it's good or bad feelings? Until next time, keep those deep dives going.